What if I told you that the reason your roses keep dying isn't because you have a black thumb, it's because nobody ever told you the truth about how roses actually work? Here's the thing. Most people treat roses like they're fragile, dramatic divas that need a degree in botany to keep alive. So they overthink it. They panic, they prune at the wrong time, and by midsummer they're staring at a sad, leggy stick with 3 brown leaves, wondering where it all went wrong. But roses aren't difficult, they're just misunderstood. In the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through 10 secrets that completely change the game. Not the recycled tips you've read on every gardening blog, but the real, slightly counterintuitive stuff that separates a bush that blooms twice a season from one that pumps out flowers spring, summer, and straight into fall. By the time we're done, you'll know exactly why your roses stall, exactly how to fix it, and exactly what to do this week to get more blooms than you know what to do with, even if you have never grown a single flower in your life. Stick with me, because secret number 7 is the one almost nobody gets right, and it's the difference between a rose that survives and a rose that shows off. Let's get into it. Secret 1. Choose a rose that was born to repeat. Here's a truth that's going to save you years of frustration. Some roses are genetically programmed to bloom once and then quit for the year. No amount of feeding, pruning, or sweet-talking will change that. So before you blame yourself, ask one question. Is your rose a repeat bloomer or a one-and-done? The old-fashioned heirloom climbers and many heritage varieties give you one glorious explosion in late spring, and then they're basically done. Beautiful, but they're not your year-round workhorses. What you want, especially as a beginner, are varieties bred specifically to re-bloom or flower continuously. Look for words like floribunda, modern shrub roses, and certain landscape rose lines that were literally engineered to flower wave after wave from spring until frost. The lesson here is simple. You can do everything right and still get disappointing results if the plant itself isn't built for the job. Pick the right rose first, and you've already won half the battle before you even pick up a trowel. Don't fight a plant's nature. Work with it. Secret 2. Roses don't want sun. They're addicted to it. You've probably heard roses need plenty of sun. That undersells it badly. Roses are solar-powered machines, and blooming is the most expensive thing they do all year. Producing a flower takes a massive amount of energy, and that energy comes from light. A rose sitting in 4 hours of dappled shade isn't being polite and modest, it's quietly starving. And starving plants don't waste resources on flowers. They just try to stay alive. You want a bare minimum of 6 hours of direct sun, but here's the part nobody emphasizes. Morning light matters more than afternoon sun. Morning light dries the dew off the leaves fast, which dramatically cuts down on the fungal diseases that wreck rose foliage. A rose that gets bright morning sun and a little afternoon relief will often outperform one baking in harsh late-day heat with damp morning leaves. So before you plant, spend a day watching your yard. Notice where the light actually falls, not where you assume it does. That 10 minutes of observation will do more for your blooms than any fertilizer on the shelf. Secret 3. Feed the soil, not the plant. This is where most beginners gets it backwards. They buy a rose, shove it in the ground, and then spend the rest of the season dumping fertilizer on top trying to force flowers. It rarely works the way they hope. Here's the shift in thinking. You're not really growing roses, you're growing soil, and the soil grows the roses. Roses are heavy feeders, but they're feeding off a living system underground. If your soil is dead, compacted clay, or thin, sandy nothing, your rose has no pantry to draw from. The fix isn't a bottle of blue chemical food, it's organic matter. Compost, well-rotted manure, leaf mold. Work a generous amount into the planting area before the rose ever goes in, and top it up every season. Rich, living soil holds moisture without getting soggy, releases nutrients slowly and steadily, and feeds the microbes that feed the roots. That steady supply is exactly what fuels continuous blooming. A rose in great soil with no fertilizer will almost always beat a rose in bad soil drowning in chemicals. Build the foundation, and the flowers take care of themselves.
Secret 4. Water deep and lazy, not shallow and often. If I could fix one habit for every beginner, it would be this one. Because how you water decides almost everything. The instinct is to give your rose a quick splash every day, a little drink to keep it happy. That instinct is quietly sabotaging you. Shallow, frequent watering trains the roots to stay near the surface, where they're vulnerable to heat, drought, and stress. A stressed rose stops blooming to conserve itself. What you want is the opposite. Water deeply and infrequently. Soak the soil thoroughly so the moisture penetrates deep, then let the top of the soil dry out before you water again. This forces the roots to grow downward, hunting for that deep moisture, building a strong, drought-resistant root system that can support non-stop flowering even when the weather turns brutal. And one more thing, water the soil, not the leaves. Wet foliage is an open invitation to black spot and mildew, the two diseases that strip a rose bare. Aim low, soak the root zone, and keep those leaves dry. Deep, lazy, low. That's the rhythm. Secret 5. Mulch is the lazy gardener's secret weapon. Let me sell you on the single highest return, lowest effort thing you can do for your roses. Mulch. And I mean it. A 2 to 3 inch layer of mulch around the base of your rose, kept slightly away from the main stem, does an absurd amount of work for you. It locks moisture into the soil so you water less. It keeps the root zone cool during heat waves, which directly protects your bloom cycle because roses sulk and stop flowering when their roots cook. It smothers weeds that would otherwise steal nutrients, and as organic mulch breaks down, it slowly feeds the soil, looping right back into secret number 3. Use something organic, shredded bark, straw, composted wood chips. Avoid piling it against the stem because trapped moisture there can cause rot. Just a clean, even blanket over the root zone. Here's the mindset shift. Bare soil around a rose is a problem you're choosing to have. Mulch turns your soil into a self-regulating system that protects your plant while you do nothing. Lay it down once or twice a season and let it work for you around the clock. Secret 6. Deadheading is you giving the plant a direct order. This is the secret that turns a so-so bloomer into a flowering machine, and once you understand the logic, you'll never skip it again. A rose has exactly one goal in life: reproduce. It makes flowers not to impress you, but eventually to produce seed-filled hips and pass on its genes. So the moment a bloom is pollinated and starts to fade, the plant thinks mission accomplished and begins pouring its energy into making seeds instead of new flowers. Deadheading hijacks that process. When you snip off a spent bloom before it can set seed, you're essentially telling the plant, "No, you're not done. Try again." Frustrated in its goal, the rose redirects all that energy back into producing fresh flowers to take another shot at reproducing. You keep removing the faded blooms, the rose keeps making new ones, and that loop is what gives you flowers all season long. The technique matters too. Don't just pinch off the petals. Cut the stem back to a point just above a leaf with 5 leaflets, angling the cut. That tells the plant where to push new growth from. Walk your garden once a week with snips in hand, remove anything spent, and you'll be amazed how relentlessly a rose will bloom when it thinks it's failing at its only job. Secret 7. Prune with purpose, not fear. Here's the secret I promised you, the one that trips up almost every beginner: pruning. People are terrified of it. They think one wrong snip will kill the plant, so they either avoid it entirely or hack away randomly in a panic. Both wreck your blooms. Understand this: roses bloom on new growth. Old, woody, crowded canes produce fewer and fewer flowers each year, while fresh new stems are flower factories. Pruning isn't punishment, it's how you tell the plant where to invest its energy. The main structural prune happens in late winter or very early spring while the plant is dormant, just before it wakes up. Your goals are simple. Remove anything dead, damaged, or diseased first, then take out canes that cross and rub against each other because those wounds invite disease, then open up the center of the bush so air can flow through, which keeps fungal problems away. What you're aiming for is an open vase-like shape with a handful of strong, healthy canes rather than a tangled thicket. And one more thing that calms the fear. Roses are astonishingly forgiving. A bad prune almost never kills them. In fact, under-pruning, being too timid, causes far more weak, blooming shy plants than over-pruning ever does. Make your cuts confidently, just above an outward-facing bud, and the plant rewards you with a flush of vigorous new growth covered in flowers. Stop being gentle. Be decisive. Your roses are begging for it.
Secret 8. Feed in rhythm with the blooming cycle. Now that your soil is rich and your pruning is sharp, let's talk about feeding the right way, because timing your fertilizer is just as important as the fertilizer itself. A rose that blooms all year is burning through nutrients constantly. Each flush of flowers drains the tank, and if you don't refill it at the right moments, the next wave comes in weaker, smaller, and slower. The mistake beginners make is feeding randomly, a big dump in spring and then nothing, or worse, heavy feeding late in the season. Here's the rhythm. Start feeding as the plant breaks dormancy and pushes new growth in spring. Then feed again after each major bloom flush, right as you deadhead, to fuel the next round. Think of it as topping up the energy tank every time the plant spends it. Use a balanced rose fertilizer or a steady organic feed and water it in well so it reaches the roots. But there's a hard stop you must respect. Quit feeding several weeks before your first expected frost. Late feeding pushes out tender new growth at exactly the wrong time, soft shoots that get destroyed by cold and stress the whole plant. Feed in time with the blooms, then let the plant wind down naturally as the season ends. Rhythm beats randomness every single time. Secret 9. Defend against disease before it starts. Let me tell you the harsh reality of rose growing. By the time you see the problem, you're already losing. Black spot, powdery mildew, and pests don't announce themselves politely. They show up, spread fast, and strip your plant of the leaves it desperately needs to fuel those blooms. A defoliated rose cannot flower. Period. So the winning strategy isn't reacting, it's preventing. And the good news is that nearly everything we've already covered is part of that defense. Morning sun dries the leaves. Watering at the base keeps foliage dry. Pruning for airflow stops fungus from settling in. Clean mulch and removing fallen, diseased leaves breaks the cycle that lets these problems overwinter and come roaring back. Build those habits, and you've eliminated most of your disease problems before they ever appear. For the rest, stay observant. Walk your garden regularly and actually look at your plants. Catch a few spotted leaves early and remove them, and you stop an outbreak. Spot aphids clustering on new buds, and you can blast them off with water or wipe them out before they explode into an infestation. The mindset is everything here. Healthy, well-grown roses resist disease naturally. You're not trying to win a war with chemicals. You're trying to create conditions where the war never starts. A clean, airy, well-tended rose is a rose that stays in leaf, and a rose in full leaf is a rose in full bloom. Secret 10. Match your care to the season. Don't fight it. Here's the final secret that ties everything together, and it's a mindset more than a technique. Roses live by the seasons, and your job is to dance with that rhythm, not drag the plant against it. So many beginners do the right things at the wrong times. They prune hard in autumn and expose fresh wounds to winter. They fertilize in late summer and trigger growth that frost destroys. They panic in the heat of midsummer when the plant naturally slows down and pauses flowering to survive, assuming something is wrong when really the rose is just being smart. Instead, think in seasons. In spring, you wake the plant up, prune for structure, feed it, and set the stage for the year. Through summer, you maintain the momentum, deadhead relentlessly, water deep, feed after each flush, and during brutal heat waves, you ease off and let the plant rest, knowing it'll surge again as things cool. In autumn, you wind down. Stop feeding, lighten up, let the final blooms come and let the plant prepare for dormancy. And in winter, mostly you leave it alone, doing your big structural prune only as the cold begins to break.
When you stop forcing and start cooperating, everything gets easier. The plant tells you what it needs if you learn to read the season. A rose grown in harmony with its natural cycle isn't just a plant that survives the year, it's a plant that blooms. So, there you have it. 10 secrets that turn rose growing from a frustrating guessing game into something you can actually control. Pick the right repeat blooming variety, flood it with morning sun, build living soil, water deep and lazy, mulch heavily, deadhead like you mean it, prune with confidence, feed in rhythm, prevent disease before it starts, and work with the seasons instead of against them. Do those things, and year-round blooms stop being a fantasy and start being your normal. Here's what I want you to do right now. Don't try to do all 10 at once. Pick the one secret that hit you hardest, the one where you went, "Oh, that's what I've been doing wrong," and go fix just that this week. Small change, big result. If this helped clear up the confusion even a little, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because we go deep on this kind of practical, no-nonsense gardening every week, and I'd hate for you to miss the next one. Now, stop watching and go give your roses a reason to show off. I'll see you in the next one.